distinguished guests and speakers, good morning and welcome to another of the series of public affairs briefings of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations on issues of vital importance to the United States and the nations in the Middle East. Thank you for coming this morning on such short notice. We put this together on Monday, and to hear from such a distinguished group of panelists who follow these matters and events on a daily basis. This morning I'm honored to be your moderator. My name is John Pratt. I recently joined the board of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations after spending 35 years in the Arabian Gulf in the energy field. So I'm well aware of the impact, implications, and importance of the Iran nuclear deal for the peoples of the region. Before we begin, I would like to thank C-SPAN for covering this event live today and for covering our public affairs briefing last Thursday on Yemen, held in this room at which the Saudi ambassador to Washington, Adel Jubeir, spoke at the conclusion of that session. C-SPAN coverage last week's briefing is available on our website, www.ncusar.org. A quick word about the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. Established 33 years ago as a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, its guiding vision is one of education. It seeks to educate Americans about the Arab countries, the Middle East, and the Islamic world, and place relations between our friends, allies, and strategic partners across the region on as firm a foundation as possible, and to continuously expand this relationship to mutual benefit. The Council accomplishes this through a variety of programs aimed at policymakers in Congress, students, academics, and our armed forces. It organizes an annual policymakers conference here in Washington, conducts study abroad, internship, and youth leadership development programs, such as the ones which will be held this weekend in Houston and in Washington. Beginning tomorrow, over 400 young Americans will represent 22 Arab countries in a Model Arab League program to debate pressing issues of the day. With over 38,000 alumni, this program serves to ensure that the next generation of Americans are better prepared to plan, predict, and conduct economic, political, and commercial relations in a region so vital to the United States. Today, our panel will assess the Iran nuclear deal, its issues and implications. It would be incorrect to say that this is a done deal. This is a preliminary agreement, a framework with many so-called technical issues to be sorted out in the coming months, by June 30th to be precise. And as has been said repeatedly, the devil is basically in the details. In the meantime, the public debate will be vigorous and intense. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? What do our regional partners and allies think? Will this define the legacy of a president in the home stretch of his administration? To be sure, the president has described this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see if we can, quote-unquote, take the nuclear issue off the table and bring regional stability to the Middle East. Let us today and in the coming months see whether these noble objectives are possible or achievable. Before we kick off, just a few housekeeping details. Each of the speakers will have 10 to 12 minutes for their remarks. In the interest of time, I refer you to their bios in our announcement. This will allow for a full hour of questions and discussions. On your chairs, you'll find 3x5 cards. Please write your question on these cards and pass them to our ushers, who will bring them forward, and we will do our best to respond as fully as possible. We will wrap up promptly at noon. To start, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, the founding president and CEO of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, Dr. John Duke Anthony. Dr. Anthony is well known and well respected in the region and in Washington. He is the only American observer to have attended each GCC ministerial and heads of state summit since 1981. After Dr. Anthony, Ambassador Mousavian of the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton will speak. He will be followed by Dr. Tom Mater, Executive Director of the Middle East Policy Council. Then Dr. Kenneth Katzman, specialist on Middle East Affairs at the Congressional Research Service, will present his remarks. Next, we will hear from Dr. Imad Harb, Distinguished International Affairs Fellow at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. And concluding, Dr. Paul Sullivan, Senior International Affairs Fellow at the National Council and Professor of Economics at the National Defense University, will wrap up the panel presentations. Dr. Anthony, if you would kindly come to the podium and kick off our discussion on this deal.
Thank you, John. When we were putting together this seminar, we came up with 14 aspects, 14 factors, phenomena, windows, lenses, prisms through which one could look at what has just occurred with the preliminary agreement, the framework, and the challenges it represents, but the opportunities it also represents. And we are only going to be able to address perhaps around 8 of these 14 factors. But we will be as frank and candid as we can. Much is unknown. In my brief remarks here, it has to do with the fears, the needs, the concerns of 3 of Iran's neighbors, Oman, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. And Tom Matteo will deal with the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait. And this is our division of labor here. But first, a few statistics so as to keep certain things in perspective. With regard to, say, Saudi Arabia's concerns. Saudi Arabia is the epicenter of prayer and pilgrimage, of faith and spiritual devotion for some 1.5 million Muslims worldwide. And inasmuch as Iran is the leading country with a largely Shia orientation on the theological stage, there is inherently, implicitly, explicitly, a degree of competition, though neither would express it as I just did. Iran is perceived as being on a roll and a run over and beyond the nuclear agreement in terms of its leaders making reference to Iran's unprecedented influence in 4 Arab capitals. This itself would be of concern to a country such as Saudi Arabia, but also others in the League of Arab States. But on the figures there, of the 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, 2 billion Christians, 1 billion of those 2 billion being Roman Catholics, some 200 million Muslims identify with the Shia sect of Islam. Overall, we're talking about some 12% of the world's Muslims being Shia. This is important to keep in mind when one reads the media and listens to people speak about the threat that Iran poses. 12%, taking on 88%, something's wrong with that picture. So the framing needs to be radically different. And at the governmental level, the highest organization to which Muslim countries belong is the Organization of the Islamic Conference. It has 57 members. No more than 4 of those 57 would be predominantly Shia in the orientation of their government. And so the numbers there are heavily imbalanced, not in favor of Iran. And this, too, needs to be kept in perspective. Now, with regard to Oman, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, these 3 are profoundly similar in their concerns regarding Iran because they're neighbors of Iran. They have issues with Iran. They have similar needs and concerns and similar interest and similar foreign policy objectives. And yet there are divergencies between and amongst them. When people talk about threat analysis, it's usually where they're located. People in Maine and Vermont, for example, are not really so concerned about Jamaican and Haitian boat people coming to their shores. And likewise, those in Florida are not obsessed with the same kinds of concerns that people who live in New England are concerned. And so this is another way of looking at the needs and concerns, interests, and foreign policy objectives of these countries. Oman is different from all of the GCC countries in the sense that it has the best, the most amicable, smooth, stable, secure relationship with Iran. And this is not new. This has been the case almost since the beginning of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and it dates from before then. Part of it has to do with the body of water between them, known as the Hormuz Strait. Many people have the image that most of the shipping goes through Iran's waters, coming into the Gulf and exiting the Gulf. This is not the case. The overwhelming vast majority of the seaborne traffic goes through Oman's waters. There are 3 lanes, one 2-mile wide lane for ships coming into the Gulf, another 2-mile wide zone for ships going out of the Gulf, and a 2-mile zone between the two that is a safety zone. And so the strategic and geographic challenge is far greater on the Omani side than on the Iranian side. And you can look at the map here to see what we're talking about. That little piece of Oman at the top of the Musandam Peninsula, it's separated from Oman like Alaska is separated from the continental United States. But this drives the strategic aspect between Oman and Iranian relations. There's not going to be a conflict between the two. Certainly that started by Oman. Oman's citizen base is less than 2 million, whereas Iran's is 80 million. And so the numbers there, again, should drive your perspective, your analysis, your assessment of what the issues are and the implications. But there's more. Iran sent close to 30,000 soldiers to Oman in the period from roughly 1972 through 1974 to help Oman put down a guerrilla, rebel, Marxist-oriented uprising in Oman's southernmost province. No other country, Arab or non-Arab, did as much as Iran did to help Oman regain its security and stability. And there are no territorial issues either between the two, unlike territorial issues that exist between some of Iran's other neighbors and Iran. With regard to Bahrain, the situation there is also numerically fruitful for your analysis. If people made frequent reference to some 60% of Iraq's population being Shia, and yet ruled by a Sunni government under the regime of Saddam Hussein, you have a situation that's even more imbalanced in the case of Bahrain, where you have the last remaining Arab country with a Sunni government ruling over a majority Shia population. And despite the much renowned Bassiouni report that came out as a result of Bahrain's uprisings in 2011, in which there was a declaratory statement that there was no evidence of Iranian involvement in those uprisings. Here is where perception comes in, and perception is often mistaken for or even more powerful a force than reality. Around 3,000 Bahrainis have been trained in Oman, coming straight out of secondary school, financed by the Shia merchants in Bahrain. and they go at age 17, 16, 18. Some stay for a semester, some stay for a year. They go largely to Qom, not to Tehran, the theological seminary base of Shiaism in Iran. And then they return to Bahrain. Some of those are regarded by the Bahraini intelligence or security services as forming sleeper cells. In other words, one day they may be called upon to return the favor of the education and the training and the leadership development that they acquired as a result of Iran. And so when the Bahraini government speaks about Iranian involvement, there is this dimension that does not come out in the media, but should help one frame Bahrain's concerns on top of periodic statements, not from the most senior Iranian officials, but Iranian representatives of the government nonetheless, that Bahrain should revert to Iranian control and influence. And this is, of course, disturbing to any Bahraini tasked with security and stability issues. And Saudi Arabia, likewise, is concerned because of the significant Shia population in its eastern province, with respect to which there's far less evidence than there is and has been in the case of Bahrain's needs and concerns. But Saudi Arabians have become quite open in accusing Iran of being behind in terms of the inspiration of the attacks on the Al-Khobar Towers in 1996, in which large numbers of people, Americans and others, were killed. So this is just a brief overview to begin the discussion by showing that there's no unanimity of viewpoint and assessment and analysis of all of Iran's neighbors. It differs from one to the next, like snowflakes and fingerprints, no two are the same. Now we have the privilege and pleasure of listening to Ambassador Saeed Hossein Mousavian. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Iran and the world powers, they both consider the deal agreed in Switzerland as a win-win deal. To my understanding, there is 5 reasons why Iranians, they would consider the deal a win for Iran. Number 1 is that the deal contains respect for Iranian nuclear technology, including enrichment, heavy water, and light water. Number 2 is ultimately the sanctions would be lifted, even gradually. Number 3 is that ultimately the Iranian nuclear file at the IAEA would be normalized. And number 4 is that, again, ultimately the Iranian nuclear file would be removed from Chapter 7, United Nations Security Council, and all resolutions would be terminated. And number 4 is that Iran, after a period, would be able to have a normal, peaceful cooperation on peaceful nuclear technology with the world powers. This is something Iran has been sanctioned from the day 1 of revolution. The world powers, they consider the deal a win for themselves. Again, I would like to give you 5 reasons why they believe this is a win for the world powers, for the US. Number 1, Iran accepted the maximum level of transparency and verification measures within non-proliferation treaty. We have safeguard agreement, we have additional protocol, and we have subsidiary arrangement code 3.1. These are 3 arrangements for verification and transparency within non-proliferation and the IAEA. Iran has accepted to be member to all three arrangements. Number two is Iran has agreed to address all possible military dimension issues which would need to give verification, transparency, inspection to the IAEA beyond NPT. Practically, the world powers, they have got the most intrusive, strong, powerful verification system during the history of proliferation in the deal with Iran. No other member state of NPT has ever been committed like Iran on verification and transparency measures. Number four is they were looking for a breakout of 1 year in case Iran decide to go for nuclear weapon. There would be a breakout of 1 year. They have got it. And number five, for confidence building measures, the US and the world powers, they needed time due to 35 years of hostility. And this deal implementation for measures are about 10 to 25 years. Therefore, they have got enough time for almost a decade to a quarter of century. To my understanding, this is a mutual win, the deal for both. And again, I would like to give you 5 reasons why this is a win-win, a mutual win for both of them. First, through diplomatic solution, they were able to escape a devastating war in the Middle East. And perhaps this is one of the very rare occasions the big crisis in the Middle East has been resolved or is going to be completely resolved through diplomacy. Second, they have been able to set a new mechanism for verification, for non-diversion toward weaponization. Many nuclear experts, they believe NPT is not enough. Many, they believe even additional protocol, which is the maximum level of transparency, is not enough. And the sets of measures is practically a new mechanism of verification and transparency, assuring non-diversion toward weaponization for the first time far beyond NPT. Therefore, if they are wise enough, the world powers, to embed the agreements with Iran on broader scope, regionally and internationally, this would be a big, big gain for proliferation globally. Number 4 is that perhaps this is the first evidence the engagement policy of President Obama announced in 2009 has worked. Iran and the US, they have been trying for 35 years to improve relations, a lot of efforts, all have failed, and this is the first time a success is stamped at the highest level of negotiation between Iran and the US, which definitely would have implication on relation between Iran and the West. And number 5, it opens the door to a regional dialogue between Iran and the world powers, Iran and the West, Iran and Europe and the US. Tehran and Washington, they decided not to go for broader dialogue, cooperation, negotiations on other issues unless they reach to something on the nuclear. Therefore, this deal, if it's finalized by July 1st, can open the door for Iran and the US to cooperate on, to have a regional dialogue, to cooperate on common interests, common threats. It's obvious now the extremism, terrorism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, they are a threat to the region, to even U.S. allies, to Iran, to international community, and there is a consensus that the threat number one to international peace and security today is ISIS and other versions of ISIS like Al-Qaeda. And there is indirect cooperation between Iran and the U.S. Americans are leading the air strike against ISIS. Iranians, they are a key element, key force on the ground battle against ISIS. They have common interest for peace and stability in Iraq, peace and stability in Afghanistan, and many other issues like security of energy. Therefore, this is step one toward cooperate. If they want, now they can open a dialogue to cooperate on commonalities and common threats. Giving 5 reasons why Iranians are happy, giving five reasons why the P5+1 is happy, and 5 reasons why the international community and the region should be happy. I believe everything is not over yet. They have a lot to do until July 1st. Many technical issues have remained unresolved. Therefore, we cannot say the deal is 100% done. Second, with a nuclear deal, 35 years of hostilities between Iran and the U.S. is not going to be over. There is a huge mistrust between Iran and the U.S., Iran and the West, and some U.S. allies in the region, even Israelis, they are very much worried whether after the deal Iranians and Americans, they would go to bed. I want to assure them they are not going to bed soon. It takes time, and this only could be the first step. Thank you. I now ask Tom Mathiar to address the next issues.
Thank you. 10 minutes isn't a lot of time, but what I want to say is that there are positive developments in this nuclear framework agreement, and enough progress to go forward with more months of negotiations over technical details and find out whether it can be implemented. The GCC states, and particularly UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar, which I've been asked to talk about, are making cautious statements about a willingness to see what the details are and to see whether more progress can be made and whether something airtight can be developed and implemented. But I say it's cautious because there is a lot of skepticism in these states. And it's not just skepticism about the nuclear deal itself. The other concern, which is perhaps even greater in some cases, is that the United States, in exchange for this agreement, is going to acquiesce in the expansion of Iranian influence in the Arab world. They are looking at Iran's influence in Iraq after the U.S. invasion and toppling of that whole system, Iran's relationship with the Assad regime and its help for the Assad regime, its influence over Hezbollah, its influence over Shia communities in Bahrain, etc., and now in Yemen. So that concern about what the United States is going to do is really great on their part. In fact, they're concerned that the United States might even consent to Iranian hegemony in the region. And when we hear talk about ISIS or Al-Qaeda and exhortations that the United States deal with that, These states are also asking that the United States pay equal amount of attention to Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere. If we are not doing that and are concentrating only on Sunni jihadists, it concerns them pretty gravely. Now, about the UAE in particular, they have a special reason for being skeptical about Iran. And I was specifically asked to address this issue, so I will. And it concerns three islands in the approaches to the shipping lanes inside the Gulf to the west of the Strait of Hormuz. They lie along the shipping lanes. If you control them, you control the shipping lanes, at least for a period of time. And the Shah of Iran wanted those islands and took them just before the United Arab Emirates became independent in early December 1971. He explained that he wanted them for strategic reasons because he was concerned that radicals in the region might take them, might be able to interfere with shipping. John was talking about the Dhofar revolution and the Shah's intervention there. He was concerned that those people might take them, for example. But it's also very much the case that the prime ministers of Iran were telling the British in the 1950s and 1960s they were also interested in potential oil deposits and gas deposits offshore those islands. So they did take them, although the UAE has a strong historical and legal claim to the islands and has ever since tried to press that claim in the international arena. And it has had the support of other GCC states, and it has had the support of the Arab League. And this support has continued during after the revolution, of course, in 1979. And one could see during that period of time that those islands can be useful because during the tanker war, when Iran was interfering with shipping coming out of Kuwait and other states in the Gulf, it did use those islands, and it did use its military assets on those islands, as well as its offshore oil installations to interfere with shipping. And the United States eventually got involved in escorting convoys of Kuwaiti and other Gulf shipping out of the Gulf. But it demonstrated the military utility of those islands. And even when there was a thaw, in the early 1990s, after the Iran-Iraq war was over, the GCC states, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, were interested enough, concerned enough about Iran's general military capabilities in the region, its conventional and its asymmetric military capabilities in the region, on its coast and on the islands, and the modernization of its military after the Iran-Iraq war. They were concerned enough about that to start signing security pacts with the United States, to open up their space for American airfields and to base CENTCOM, and that concerned Iran greatly, and Iran has complained about that greatly during that period of time. Iran has conducted naval exercises in the region. Some of those naval exercises have involved attempts to block passage through the Strait of Hormuz. UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and others are participating in GCC and U.S.-led naval exercises so that they would be able to counter that. They're certainly purchasing a great deal of American military equipment to modernize their armed forces to be able to contain any potential Iranian aggression. And although it's impossible to tell what Iran's intentions are, these states are looking at Iran's capabilities. It's fast attack craft, it's anti-ship missiles, and so many other acquisitions that they've made over the past decades, and they believe they need at least the ability to deter that and are getting that from the United States. However, as I said when I began, they're not just concerned about the nuclear agreement. They're concerned about the trustworthiness of the United States. There was a time I heard one of the officials say, There was a time when the United States was a force to be reckoned with, and now it is a problem to be dealt with, which means that they are not sure that they can trust the United States. The United States does say, we have your back when it comes to an external aggression, but they're looking at our intervention in Iraq, they're looking at our hesitation in Syria, they're looking at our repeated failure decade after decade to help the Palestinians liberate themselves from the Israelis, and they're asking, what kind of political judgment does the United States have? So this is all part of their concern about the nuclear agreement and why they want assurances from the United States that we're going to do something about Iran's presence in the Arab world. And they're actually concerned that we might go back to the concept that we had when the British withdrew from the Gulf in the early 1970s, which was the twin pillar policy, where we supported both Iran and Saudi Arabia against the Soviet Union, but more of the support went to Iran because it was more highly developed. That concept comes up. They're concerned about that. They're also concerned that, but as I said before, they're even more concerned that we would tilt toward Iran and recognize Iran's power and population and industry and technological base and think that they should be, that their aspirations in the region should be accepted. So while these countries will say that they have a cautious willingness to consider this agreement, I would say that there is a substantial concern there. You can even say in the case of Qatar that although it's often said that their relations with Iran are cordial, almost as cordial as Oman's, I would point out that they did vote in favor, when they had a rotating seat on the Security Council, they did vote in favor of Security Council Resolution 1737 in December 2006, and voted in favor of Security Council Resolution 1747 in March 2007. Both of those resolutions imposed sanctions on Iran because of its nuclear program and ballistic missile program, and identified people who should be sanctioned and institutions and banks that should be sanctioned. And so they're on record as being concerned about that program. And I would even say that in these capitals there are people who, if this agreement fails to satisfy them, if they feel that they are in danger because of the potentially additional boldness that Iran might think if it were allowed eventually to escape from these inspections and restrictions in 10 or 20 or 15 years, 30 years. These are states that might think about other options very reluctantly, but they are countries that have talked about how we need to keep all options on the table if this agreement doesn't work out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for inviting me. I will probably not talk for 10 minutes since my medicines wear off in 8 minutes, so that's my limit. I am in a CRS capacity today, so I will be in CRS style today, which is objective, nonpartisan. If there's congressional staff in the room, I work for you, so ask away. Be glad to see you afterwards and clear up anything that's unclear. I will confine most of my comments today to the sanctions part of the deal, the issue. It's clear from both the Iranian and the U.S. fact sheet that basically all of the sanctions that have been imposed by the U.S. and the EU, other than human rights related sanctions, that have been imposed since 2010, UN Resolution 1929 of June 2010, are going to be relieved as a consequence of this agreement if it's finalized. That means Iran's being shut out of the international banking system would come to an end. Iran's being shut out of the SWIFT electronic payment system would end. Sanctions on Iran's sale of oil, sanctions on Iran's shipping of oil, sanctions on insurance of Iranian oil tankers, sanctions on buying Iranian petrochemicals, sanctions on supplying Iran with automotive gear, sanctions with supplying Iran with oil drilling, exploration equipment. All of these would presumably come to a conclusion if this deal is finalized and when the IAEA certifies that Iran has complied. And this is still a little bit unclear, has to be clarified a little bit more in when the deal is finalized. But apparently the IAEA is going to be the arbiter. They are going to certify that Iran has reduced its stockpile to the 300 pounds or whatever the agreement says, that Iran has dismantled 15,000 centrifuges and put them away. When these things are certified, that's when the sanctions would be relieved, is what I'm seeing, even though the two fact sheets differ a little bit. Iran would, by these measures, gain access to approximately 130 to 150 billion in hard currency reserves that are in various banks overseas, much of which is in South Korea, some of which is in Japan and other countries. These is hard currency payments that were made for oil that Iran is unable to move back to the central bank. No government has impounded this money. No government has taken title to this money. It is Iran's money. These are in bank accounts under Iran's name, but because of the banking sanctions, no bank is cooperating, will cooperate in helping Iran move this money back to the central bank. That's why it's overseas, and Iran has not been able to get to it. So the idea that these are frozen assets or impounded assets, that is incorrect. I see some oil people in the audience here. As I said, one of the big things in this is that Iran would be able to freely export oil again. What does that mean? Well, there are 5 countries currently that have active exemptions to avoid U.S. sanctions to buy oil. They are buying Iranian oil: Japan, South Korea, China, Turkey, and India. These countries could conceivably, as soon as the sanctions are relieved, they could increase their orders for Iranian oil, and Iran could start supplying those 5 with more oil. The EU, which was buying a quarter of Iran's oil, the EU enacted a ban on purchases of Iranian oil, so it's going to take longer for the EU to start buying Iranian oil again, because the EU would have to meet, they have to get a consensus, there has to be a political decision to lift that ban. So that could be perhaps maybe early 2016. The other 5 that I mentioned could conceivably, let's say there is a deal in June, let's say the IAEA gives the go-ahead September, October, those 5 could conceivably start buying more Iranian oil right away. The Iranian economy, in my estimation, is likely to rebound fairly quickly. This $150, $130 billion that I mentioned that Iran would get access to, that is virtually equal to Iran's entire year of one entire budget year, that they would instantly have hard currency. The value of Iran's rial would rise instantly, inflation would fall, employment would increase, the people whose shops are shuttered, their factories are shuttered would reopen, people would go back to work. Some people go to work, but they don't. Right now, under the sanctions regime, they are going to work, but they basically drink tea all day. They may get paid 3 months late, and the boss might give them maybe a quarter of what they're owed. I mean, this is what is going on now. Basically the entire Iranian economy is in a state of suspension, suspended animation. The entire economy is waiting for this deal to get done and the sanctions relief to occur. That's when everybody goes back to work and starts getting paid again, starts buying clothes again, buying electronics. This is when the economy fires up again. And just to close, I'll just talk a little, since I am with CRS, obviously, the administration plan is, if this deal is finalized, there would be use of presidential waiver authority on the U.S. sanctions on the foreign companies that have been so effective. And then after some period of Iranian compliance, no one has specified how much. I personally think it's about a year, but don't quote me necessarily on that. The administration plans to then ask Congress to enact legislation that would change, modify, or repeal or revoke the U.S. sanctions that have been put in place by statute. And then it would be, a congressional decision at that point. The UN sanctions under the deal apparently will be relieved. And so if Congress did not act, obviously those sanctions would stay in force, and there could be, obviously debate between the United States and U.S. allies as far as the sanctions relief, because the U.S. sanctions on the foreign companies would still be in force. But anyway, the plan would be to have a period of Iranian compliance and then ask the Congress to enact sanctions relief under the agreement. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here on such an April shower morning. Well, I was asked to speak about basically the agreement as it applies or does not apply to what's going on in Lebanon and Syria, where Iran has a lot of influence. Basically, the negotiations themselves, as far as we know, did not discuss anything outside of the negotiations on the nuclear program. So there were supposedly there was no connection, specific connection between Iran's other issues in its foreign policy and the region, or the world for that matter. But generally speaking, everybody knows that the nuclear program was only a part of Iranian foreign policy, but it's also, or the negotiations on the nuclear program, but also that it itself, no matter how much we deny that there is a connection to Iranian influence in other places, and that specific negotiation had its impact on other things. Basically two perspectives, that Iran actually used the issue of its role in Lebanon and Syria to try to get a better deal on the nuclear program. And the other one is that it didn't. But the way it's seen in these two countries, with Iranian influence in both countries, both through its support of the Syrian regime and its support of Hezbollah in Lebanon, everybody there thinks that there has to be some sort of an outcome that may reflect on political positions or political conditions in both countries. In other words, if Iran resolves this issue on the nuclear file, like the ambassador already mentioned, will there be basically outcomes related to other foreign policy issues in which Iran is involved? In Lebanon, the country is actually almost on the verge of collapse. The state is slowly almost imploding. There is a condition where it's almost like, Ken said earlier, suspended animation in Lebanon. There's no president, no presidential elections have been held to elect a new president since last May. And basically, Hezbollah and its ally on the Christian side are the ones who are holding up the process. Why that thing is going on is really beyond any rational interpretation. Because if it is really the person of the president that's important, everybody is thinking about what about the future of the country, what about the fate of that country. Without a president, there is no constitutional continuity, so to speak, and today the executive authority is in the hands of the prime minister, who at any time can be sent home, basically, by specifically if Hezbollah and its allies in the Lebanese political system just simply withdraw from that political process. So that is a very, very important consideration. There are obviously other issues, sectarian polarization in the country, where unfortunately a lot of some Sunnis, not a lot, because the traditional leadership of the Sunnis in the country, in Lebanon, is still able to really maintain control over its community. But there are those people out there who are basically starting to voice the issue of, okay, well, we the Sunnis are not getting what we are supposed to be getting. The Shia are basically controlling the country. On the other hand, through Hezbollah, that is. On the other hand, the Shia through Hezbollah are also worried about a very, very important development in Lebanon over the last 3 or 4 years, the presence of 1.6 million Syrian refugees. The overwhelming majority of them are Sunni. And unfortunately, these refugees are not expected to return to Syria anytime soon, because Syria is destroyed, and these people will have, if they were to be repatriated to Syria, there will be some sort of an infrastructure that would receive them. So both people in Lebanon are not happy with the situation that's going on in Syria. So the imposition of the Syrian civil war in the Lebanese political system is really a very serious issue. What's interesting also is, Hezbollah, for instance, has not, while it criticized really criticized hard the Operation Decisive Storm in Yemen, they haven't necessarily really said very much about the nuclear deal itself. It was very, very strange that people in Tehran were celebrating that this is a good deal, we want to get out of sanctions and all that, and Hezbollah didn't say very much. They probably are waiting to see how things shape up over the next couple of weeks, or maybe over the next few months until the technical issues are resolved. But it's really very, very interesting that Hezbollah would not come out with any specific statement on the negotiations. In the Syrian situation, the regime over the last probably 2 weeks to a month has really experienced a lot of setbacks, and on the ground, specifically in the south and in the north, the regime has suffered military defeats. So despite the fact that Hezbollah has really thrown its full weight behind the regime and is fighting on many fronts in Syria, despite the fact that there are Shiite militias who are being imported from Iraq and even Afghanistan and South Asia, and despite the fact of the Russian basically open spigot to military spigot, so to speak, to Syria, things are not going very well for the Syrian regime. So if you look at this very, very brief overview of all this, we can imagine, okay, what now? I mean, would there be some sort of a change in the situation in Lebanon and Syria? And this is something that really is quite important to answer, because if Iran were, going back to the two perspectives on whether Iran was using Lebanon and Syria as a bargaining chip in its nuclear program negotiations, or whether it was not, it's really very, very important to try to answer this. Okay, the nuclear negotiations are done. Iran does not necessarily need to use the nuclear issue to hold off political development or other development in Lebanon or Syria, will there be some sort of a rethinking of the Syrian and Lebanese situation? And this is something that obviously everybody is speculating on. The Arab governments are obviously now they're very busy with the war in Yemen. Definitely the GCC countries are very busy there, but at the same time they are looking at the nuclear negotiation as how it might reflect on their interests in those two countries. So if we talk about Lebanon and Syria, we also need to talk about the GCC situation and how the GCC really deals with this. There is a wild card here, and this is something that we really don't know how it's going to really shape up over the next 3 months until the end of June. And the wild card is specifically, will anybody within the Iranian political system that is, when we look at Iran, we really are looking at the rational actor, but yet at the same time, the nature of the Iranian political system, its domestic politics are rather very fragmented. It's a very factional kind of political system. So obviously the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has the ultimate say, obviously, and he definitely will try to rein everybody in whatever program or whatever decision that the Iranian political leadership should have. But yet at the same time, there are those different factions within the system who may not be necessarily very, very open and very accepting of the nuclear deal. In other words, actually, just only yesterday, something positive came out of the leader of the Revolutionary Guard, General Jafari, where he said that our negotiators really worked very, very, very hard to get a very good deal. So, in other words, this was some sort of a way of saying, okay, well, you did okay. It was all right. And this might reflect on how Hezbollah, for instance, looks at this issue. But yet, at the same time, there are other people within the political system. Mehran Kumbrava described the political system as in suspended equilibrium. I mean, all the different factions have their own interests. All of them are trying to pull to their own position. And so not very much really happens on the domestic scene. So are these different factions, will they do something in the foreign policy arena? In other words, will there be somebody who might think that it is possible to activate, for instance, activate the Lebanese-Syrian front with Israel? A couple of rockets here, a couple of rockets there. Something might happen like that, and Israel is not in any mood to let things go, and it might respond. And if it does respond, then there goes the deal, the nuclear deal itself, because Hezbollah will have to respond, and then things will really fall apart. I'll be happy to answer your questions if you'd like, and I give you Dr. Paul Sullivan. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the invite, John Duke. They've asked me to talk about energy and how the potential relaxation or nullification of the sanctions, whichever might be happening, can affect energy systems, not just in Iran, but regionally and globally. To put this into perspective, Iran is an energy giant. It has either number 1 or number 2 in gas reserves in the world. Trades that off between Russia and Iran, depending on what you're looking at. It's number 4 in conventional oil reserves in the world. And I'm not talking about shale gas or shale oil. This is conventional. So when this is opened up, if it's opened up, and that's a big if, and I'll get to that, then this will definitely change energy markets globally, because oil markets are global markets. It won't affect just crude oil, but also refined products and petrochemicals. Opening up Iran, if it does open up, will also change natural gas markets. LNG markets are developing as world markets rather than regional ones, and if Iran hops into this, it could change things considerably. One reason why Iran has not been involved in LNG is because they can't get at the right technology to develop LNG export facilities or to develop the South Pars field, which is a gigantic field they share with Qatar. Which gives me the impression if this opens up too much, it could be that Iran and Qatar could come to some joint agreement, even in the use of Ras Laffan as an export facility. All you need is a pipeline. Another part of this whole issue is pipelines and other export venues going into Central Asia and the Caspian. Don't just look south. Don't just look at Asia. Look at right nearby to the north. Iran is on the Caspian Sea. You have major oil and gas producers in the Caspian. Those pipeline systems connecting Iran, its fields are mostly in the southwest, but if the profit's right, you can build the pipeline, could change the entire network of pipeline politics going into Europe, Russia, Central Asia, and beyond. This is a huge deal. We shouldn't just be looking at paper dollars and paper oil, but the hedge funds are going to have a great time on this one. They're all guessing what's going to happen to the price of oil tomorrow. How many in this room get that question? It's like a parlor game. What's the price going to be tomorrow? Will the price go down $3? Will it go up $3? We're talking about trillions of dollars of paper oil trading regularly, people winning and losing regularly, trying to figure out what's going to be going on. Now, another thing that really is not talked about too much in this whole situation is the pipeline going to Pakistan and India, which has been discussed with Iran for some time. The sanctions are taken off. That constraint is taken off to make this happen. Although there is a bit of a problem in a place called Baluchistan, which Iran and Pakistan share. Some border guards got killed recently. There's a great deal of instability, but I think money may talk in that situation as well. Another part of the energy system that people are not discussing is electricity. Iran, if this is completely opened up, could be part of a power pool of electricity production and consumption and sharing through regional transmission networks and so forth, going into Central Asia, the Caspian, possibly across to Iraq, and to many other places, Afghanistan and so forth. This could be a huge change, but there are big ifs. Energy efficiency technologies, some consider dual use, could also enter Iran. They could be more efficient with their use of energy. I think I can hear the investors salivating right now. Could you imagine the tens of billions of investment that could flow into these things that no one's even talking about? Energy efficiency. What about renewables? Geothermal, solar, wind. This is not happening. Now think of the idea of the snapback of sanctions, which I think is an absolutely absurd term. Excuse me. You have tens of billions of dollars flowing into Iran. Oil going here, oil going there, mostly to Asia, probably into the Caspian, pipelines being built, and then someone says they didn't follow the game, we're going to snap back on sanctions? Anyone ever heard of lobbyists? Money will talk in this. Snapping back the sanctions is not as easy as that. Taking off the sanctions is not as easy as that either. Another part of the energy change in the region I would expect to happen if this goes forward is a nuclearization of the Gulf, and that is kind of a focus on electricity from nuclear power, desal from nuclear power, but also nuclearization in another way. And it could be that the Arab Gulf states will see this as a green light for them to move forward with this because of the threat that they feel. All right. I should have said caveats in the beginning. All of my opinions are mine alone, do not represent those of the U.S. government, the National Defense University, or any other organization I'm a part of. Okay, now if I get into trouble, I've given the caveats, I'm not talking for them, and what I'm about to say will be clear that I'm not talking for them. This is not a deal. I wish the newspapers and the TV and the internet would stop using that word, or at least put quotes around it. It's a framework for discussion of a deal. If you were about to buy a house or a small business and the person you're buying it from said, here is the framework for discussion, you wouldn't be asking, when can I move in? This 2.5-page document is less complicated than the merger of two small greengrocers in Cairo. It is too simple, it is too vague, and it opens up for trouble. Negotiating the details of any agreement to sufficient clarity could be far more complex than anyone could imagine or think right now. The terms are not clear. What we're seeing right now is another version of groupthink. We saw groupthink before the Iraq War. Now we're seeing groupthink on this deal. Everyone's hopping on board. Read the documents. Read the terms. For example, the Fordo complex is to be converted into an atomic research center. Okay, anyone developed an atomic research center lately? How long will it take? How complicated is that? How can you prove it's an atomic research center? I'm seeing people getting worried already. What is sufficient to make this deal kick in? What is sufficient for the Iranians to accomplish, and in what time period? Oh, by the way, developing an atomic research center in a top university could take years. Years. Any deal, a real deal, right now is an illusion. We have to get beyond that illusion and get to the details. Otherwise, these sanctions are not going to be taken off. And all these things I'm talking about, oil and gas and petrochemicals and electricity, all this really fine stuff that will get investors very fired up, pun intended, will not be happening. We have to do all of this by July 1st. Anyone done negotiating on simple business deals? July 1st is pretty tough. Now we're trying to figure out a nuclear deal by July 1st. Could we please get real? All right. It's going to be very difficult to turn these sanctions off, and it's going to be very difficult to turn them back on again. Ken alluded to something about the waivers. Some of these sanctions have waivers. Some of them don't have waivers. Some of them are law. You have UN sanctions. You have EU sanctions. You have combination sanctions. It's not the same thing as just putting a red mark through a piece of paper. What is meant by not using anything beyond the IR-1 centrifuge within 10 years? 10 years is a short period of time. 10 to 15 years, everything could change. Another thing that gets me kind of concerned is a one-year breakout time. Wow. Why is everyone saying that's a good thing? How about a no-year breakout time? I think I feel a lot more comfortable with that one. Am I being outrageous enough? Am I shattering illusions here? What that essentially says in this agreement is the Iranians can build a nuclear weapon in 1 year. I don't think we should agree to that. I don't think we should agree to 10 to 15 years either. I think this should be expanded out. 10 to 15 years, everything turns around. This whole thing falls to the wayside. And the use of different centrifuges, the Fordo complex, just about everything else goes right back online at the end of 10 to 15 years. If you have patience, all changes. And by then, the oil is exported, the money's pouring in. This $150 billion that Ken alluded to, as an economist, when I hear $150 billion pouring into a country, I hear inflation. I hope that the Iranian leadership does not still follow Ayatollah Khamenei's edict that economics is for donkeys, because economics works. And inflation and unemployment and hyperventilating economy drove Iran into its revolution in 1979. We seem to be in a dream world here. What is the meaning of the term in the deal, significant amount of time, in the banning of technologies that might be used for producing nuclear weapons? You'll have to excuse me. I worked in a law office for some years, and I learned from the lawyers how to parse words, how to tear them apart, how to try to figure out the real meaning as stated here. And if there's enough vagueness, change it. Who controls the inspection decisions? The Security Council? The Russians? Who does that? That's a little bit vague. Also, some of you may not know about nuclear technologies. Every nuclear power plant that uses uranium in the world produces plutonium, produces enriched uranium, cesium, and lots of other stuff in it. It's the nature of the process of producing electricity in a nuclear plant. 1 minute. Okay, in 1 minute, what can I tell you? I am concerned about how this is worded. I am concerned once the door is open and the horses are out of the barn, how difficult it will be to get the horses back into the barn. I'm concerned what this will do to the region. I can see the hope. I can see the potential for developing energy systems in the region and beyond and opening up world markets to Iran and so forth. This is all great. But the deal must be struck with strict language, strict timetables, and no illusions. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for a broad range of views and comments and a very insightful presentations on economics, politics, the regional implications for this deal. Now it comes to the most interesting part, your questions. I think for the next 40-plus minutes, we'll just go ahead and run through the questions we've received from the audience and then turn them over to the panels. I'll read them as we go and appreciate very much. If you've got any more, just pass them along and we'll try to respond as best we can. For Ken Katzman, will all U.S. investments in oil field services companies, U.S. oil companies, other U.S. companies like Boeing be held up until Congress acts?
The fact sheet distributed by the administration makes it clear that sanctions that bar U.S. companies from doing business with Iran will not be lifted under this arrangement. So the sanctions that are to be relieved primarily refer to U.S. sanctions on foreign non-U.S. companies. It is very clear from the U.S. statements that there will not, as a consequence of this particular arrangement, if it's finalized, and U.S. companies might at some point be allowed to participate pursuant to perhaps the U.S. and Iran clearing up their differences, quote unquote, on a range of other issues that have plagued the relationship over the past 35 years. Thank you.
The next question. Might Hezbollah's hesitation to comment on the deal be due to a concern that a warming of U.S.-Iranian relations might reduce Iranian support for them? Imad, perhaps you might want to kick off that.
Well, I think this is a. I don't think that the Iranians are combining their thinking of what Hezbollah represents to them with their thinking on what the nuclear deal would be like. The only thing is that maybe Iran will tell Hezbollah, indicate to Hezbollah that it probably is time for Hezbollah to help to assist in putting the Lebanese state back on track. And just a phone call from Tehran would really set things very, very much straight in Beirut.
Does anybody else have any comment to make on that one? Okay. Another question that's looking at the broader relationship between Iran and Israel is that now that Iran's nuclear power in the region is being analyzed, is there a growing concern with the relationship between Iran and Israel? What do you think will happen? I think that's for everybody to comment on because of the significance of the discussion, particularly recently on Capitol Hill here.
Here, I think context is important. For almost half the lifespan of Israel from its establishment in 1948 to the present. The relationship between Iran and Israel was intimate, it was strategic, it was economic, it was geopolitical. And the roots are very deep in terms of the stories pertaining to Esther, a Persian who helped to free the Jews from captivity from Babylon. So the degree of trust over the centuries between Jews and Persians is deep. Times it's been massive, times it's been pervasive. And when Iraq's large Jewish community went to Israel, thousands went by way of Iran. And during the 50s and 60s, the heyday of Arab nationalism, Iran and Israel danced in each other's shadow. They didn't need each other's zip code or area code. There's only one Israel, only one Iran. Each has been concerned about an intimate U.S.-Arab relationship because there are 22 Arab countries, only one Iran, only one Israel. So that also was part of the glue or the adhesive. And many in Israel regard these last years since 1979 as an aberration in what would ordinarily be a normal, mutually beneficial, reciprocally rewarding relationship between the two countries. So that's background, that's context. But it shows a degree of trust and commonality of interest, similarity of interest, complementary interest between the two, and that now may begin to come back into focus, but it will be quite a stretch. In the near term, it's a bridge too far. But as recently as 1978, meetings I had, briefing by the head of Israel's foreign ministry in answer to a question of where do you obtain your energy, your oil? And the answer was 90% we get from Iran.
The issue is about nuclear and the impact of a nuclear agreement on the region, Iran and Israel. I think we need to be sincere to each other about Iranian nuclear policy and Israeli nuclear policy. Iran is member of Non-Proliferation Treaty from the day one. Israel has never accepted to be member of Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran does not have nuclear bomb. Israel has about 400 nuclear bombs. Recently, Pentagon accepted Israelis, they have nuclear bomb. Just in a decade, Iran has given more than 7,000 man-day inspection to IAEA. No other NPT member during the history of IAEA has given such a level and amount of inspection which Iranians they gave. Israel has never given even one inspection. Iran has initiated nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East in 1970. This is Iranian proposal, has insisted for 40, 50 years. Israel is declining, is rejecting, is objecting nuclear weapon-free zone. In mid-1990s, Egypt proposed Middle East free from weapons of mass destruction, WMD free zone in Middle East. Iran was the second country to support it. It's over 20 years Israelis, they are opposing weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. Therefore, we are talking about two very, very, very different policy on proliferation. And as an Iranian, I'm really shocked. Everybody is talking about Iran, and nobody is talking about the Israeli nuclear bomb, and all pressures and sanctions are on Iran, while Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb. And nobody is talking about Israel. I mean, this is a very clear double standard in Hill, in Washington, in the West, about proliferation issue in the Middle East. However, this deal has a lot of new elements which really can contribute to permanent removal of any proliferation risk in the Middle East. It says Iran would be committed to have no reprocessing. Okay, this is first Iranian goodwill. As long as you do not have reprocessing, you cannot make nuclear weapon from heavy water facilities. Israelis, they have reprocessing. Would the U.S. and the world powers be ready to regionalize the measures agreed with Iran for all regional countries? Nobody would have enrichment above 5%. As long as there is no enrichment above 5%, there would be never nuclear bomb from enrichment facility. If there is no reprocessing, it's impossible to have nuclear bomb from heavy water facilities. It can have major positive impact if Israelis also would be ready to follow the same nuclear policy Iran has followed for 40, 50 years, and if the other regional countries would be ready to accept such a measures Iran has accepted far beyond NPT.
Tom, do you have any comments on that?
Me?
Yeah.
Paul.
I don't think Israel will ever give up its nuclear weapons or agree to restrictions. I think I would expect them to continue to oppose this deal no matter what, and to lobby for more actions against Iran. That's because of the nature of the two governments. John was talking about how in the past Israel viewed Iran as a partner in a sense, because both of them had concerns about the Arab world and American relations with the Arab world. But I can't see that entering into their minds any time in the near or midterm. And in fact, their concern about Iran is so great that they are, in a sense, reversing that trend and trying to forge relations with Arab states that also view Iran as a threat. It's a very tactical effort on their part. It's only because they both have a concern about Iran. When Netanyahu was in front of the Congress a month or so ago and warned that Iran is a country that commits aggression against the Arab world, I think that he I don't think that's his primary concern.
Paul. Okay.
Just very briefly, I mean, I think I would say there was just simply a consensus in the international community that the way Israel was formed, how small it is, the fact that its neighbors rejected it immediately, there's just been a consensus to sort of allow it to have this deterrent. So I think continuing to raise the fact that they're not in the NPT and all this stuff, it's maybe intellectually precise, but it's probably not going to go very far. So that would be my response.
The Israeli military and other institutions don't start the day by saying Magbar Amrika. death to America. Maybe changing that could help go a long way. Also, personalities define relationships. And right now we have very strong personalities involved in the Israeli-Iranian dialogue, if we want to call it that. It's more like two monologues that never meet. Also, there are other issues involved here. And let me get it straight. I'm not saying I'm against the deal. I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm just saying get better specificity and make it a real deal, not this thing floating in the air. I am not for war with Iran. If anyone has that impression, I've been through war games looking at the costs of that war, and it is astonishing what could happen. It would make Iraq look like a picnic. Iran is a bigger country, bigger military, more organized, hierarchical, a long culture, and as soon as the boots hit the ground, welcome to hell for all sides involved. We don't need that. What we need is some kind of a diplomatic, economic, informational, and other change to bring this about. And my sense is this 2.5-page document is not it, because we have other issues to deal with. What's happening in Bahrain, what's happening in Eastern Saudi Arabia, what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Yemen. This is not part of the deal. Ballistic missiles are not part of the deal. This is a very narrow document. This solves a very narrow question. And again, I am for improving relations, but it has to be done in the right way. Excuse me.
I did want to say something. I just urge you to read Dr. Anthony's latest piece on why are we talking about Iran? Why is what are the reasons basically behind this push towards Iran? So I urge you to read his report on that.
There's a fundamental question here with regard to actually getting a copy of the deal. Somebody asked, where can we get a copy of the framework between the U.S. and Iran? Where is it published? Does
On the
anybody
White
have
House website.
on the website?
Yeah.
SUSRIS has published it, and the Middle East Policy Council has it on its website.
You can also find the Iranian interpretation and the French interpretations, which are somewhat different than the White House interpretation, which is part of the problem here.
Yeah.
There are cultural differences, there are linguistic differences, and there are also political differences across the country that are changing the way this is interpreted. It's far from done, and it's far from clear. Maybe it was important to make it unclear, to see what happens.
Do we have any idea who the leads are on returning back to those discussions, the technical discussions? Are they going to be Secretary of Energy? Is Secretary Kerry going to be reengaged on the technical sides on the Iranian side? At what level will they be?
If they haven't started this yet, the clock is ticking. July 1st is not so far away. You know, that's almost midterm time for a college, and this is trying to deal with all this complicated issue. Probably there are a bunch of Sherpas out there on all sides doing the heavy lifting. And once they get to a point where the Sherpas do most of the heavy lifting, then the big players go on CNN, Fox TV, and Iranian TV, and then they start to say, well, we made the deal. The real work happens at a different level.
Right.
Yeah, there was David Ignatius a couple of days ago. I don't know if you read him I don't know if it appeared in the Post, but in the Daily Star, he basically summed it up as, if I may, basically the deal or framework for the deal, slightly over 5,000 centrifuges for the next 10 years that Iran would maintain, would be allowed to work only. Enrichment for 15 years will be banned at Fordo. This is the facility, the Mountain facility. Iran can enrich some uranium and not tons, which is a heavy water reactor, Natanz heavy water reactor?
No, that's
No.
Iraq.
I'm sorry, that's Iraq heavy water reactor. At Natanz to 3.67% purity, and that is capped at 300 kilograms for 15 years. 1,000 IR2 centrifuges, this is the newer version of the centrifuge, will be removed from Natanz. And the Iraq heavy water reactor would be reconfigured to prevent the production of bomb fuel, basically plutonium. For the IAEA, inspections would last for 25 years of all facilities, all mines, all imports that have to do with all of this. The IAEA will have full access to everything. And in return, Iran will get the gradual removal of sanctions as soon as IAEA provides verification. So whenever IAEA does that, then the sanctions will begin to be lifted.
To put this in perspective, this is the White House document explaining the deal.
Right.
This is it.
Next question. With the GCC countries so close to Iran and the nuclear sites, even if Iran's intent is to build nuclear for energy, what language should be insisted upon in the final agreement to safeguard and avoid nuclear accidents like Fukushima?
This is an issue of real concern in terms of one of the sites on Kharj, the one nearest to the Gulf and the other Gulf countries. Because of the sanctions, because of the non-existent relations between Tehran and Washington diplomatically and formally, there could be such an accident. Iran has had a history of earthquakes. So has Turkey. They're part of a different tectonic plate than those of Arabia. And so there is a legitimate fear, what if there is an earthquake in that region? The fear is that there would be spillage and leakage, and that this would be contaminating, and it would pose an immediate direct threat to the water desalination plants in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and elsewhere. And ships may refuse to come into the Gulf until this is dealt with and cleaned up. That is more than a nightmare. That has catastrophic implications. The Russians were involved in building that reactor, and they are also the so-called inspectors of it until now. But this is like putting the fox in the coop with the chickens. There needs to be a more technologically professional, efficient, and renowned inspector of that particular facility, because it is the one that could be catastrophic were there to be any accident there, like a Chernobyl. And the Kuwaitis, the ones that are the most concerned and involved with this. In the Chernobyl disaster, some 200,000 people had to be relocated, and that was costly. And the United Nations asked for a number of donor countries to subsidize and finance it, and Kuwait was the leading one. So Kuwait's been involved in this kind of an issue longer than any of the other GCC countries on the accident side, which relates directly to inspection and relates directly to one particular nuclear facility, the one that's closest to the Gulf, and that could affect them all.
That's the Bushehr reactor.
Bushehr, yeah.
Yes. And Bushehr, yes.
First of all, Bushehr is under full control of the IAEA on the safety issues. It is 100% from the day one has been under IAEA full supervision for the safety issues, and the IAEA has fully confirmed all safety measures and mechanisms already is there. Second, joint plan of action also, on the framework they agreed, they have also agreed, the world powers, to have more cooperation with Iran on the safety issues. Third, Fukushima was in Japan. Japan never lowered its nuclear activities after Fukushima. They continue the same nuclear activities. Chernobyl was in Russia. Russia increased its nuclear activities after Chernobyl. Emirates is going to have 4 nuclear power plants. Saudi Arabia is going to have power plants. Turkey is going to have power plants. Therefore, we really do not need to create more artificial fears about Iranian nuclear program.
The Japanese shut down all of their nuclear power plants. I was there 2 weeks ago visiting the Hamaoka plant just west of Tokyo, and they're spending billions of dollars to set up safety devices in the event of another earthquake or tsunami. The Japanese have been through a very difficult energy time since they had to shut down 30% of their electricity, which is what they have done. And there's a huge debate in Japan right now about whether they turn these back on again. The farther away from Tokyo you are, the more likely one of those plants is going to be started up again. It's a very emotional issue. And this Fukushima problem wasn't just the earthquake, it's a water flow problem. And when I think water in the Middle East, I wonder what some people are thinking. The Jordanians are building a plant in the desert of northwestern Jordan using a water treatment plant as a source of water to cool the spent fuel and the nuclear plant. So I told a reporter a few days ago, I wouldn't live beside that thing. Because if the water treatment plant goes down, the water flow goes down, and the thing overheats, and you have a Fukushima in northeast Jordan right near the Iraq border. The Middle East is water short. If you're going to be putting the plant on the ocean, that makes sense. If you're putting it in the desert, that makes no sense. If you're putting it on a fault line where Bashir is, it's on several fault lines. This makes no sense. It's near the ocean, so maybe you keep the cooling going. But at the same time, it will shut down automatically if there is an earthquake. It has before. The one in San Diego shut down. Nuclear facilities are very complicated beasts, and they need a lot of water and a lot of water flow, and people are just not thinking this through.
Anybody else want to comment on? Okay. Question for Ken Katzman. Please compare and contrast Libya sanctions removal versus Iranian sanctions removal, and when will Iran be removed from the terrorism list?
It's quite some questions. I know C-SPAN is here, so I want to just say hi, Mom.
So I'll take that opportunity to...
Iran's removal from the U.S. list of terrorism state sponsors, well, there's some young people in the audience, so maybe by the time they're, my age or our age, that could happen. Iran is not anywhere close to being removed from the terrorism list. There is no consideration in the U.S. government for removing Iran from that list. I would just be categorical on that question. The other, what was the rest of the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, let's see.
Libya, comparing Libya.
Yeah. Libya.
Well, we conceivably could have 2 similar situations. Libya gave up its nuclear program and actually dismantled the whole thing. So obviously, there was not the same level of debate over lifting some of the sanctions on Libya because they had been so basically dismantled the entire program. Iran is not doing that. Obviously, this deal leaves them with a substantial infrastructure, and we've, had more than an hour of discussion of the continuing concerns. So, obviously, it's not quite as easy. But, again, just looking at authorities, though, the president does have, quite a bit of authority in terms of suspending sanctions. But if you're talking about lifting sanctions outright, where congressional action is needed, then of course it becomes much more involved. And most of the main sanctions that would be relieved under this deal are enforced by congressionally passed statute, and therefore Congress, to lift the sanctions outright, would have to pass new legislation to do that.
There's a follow-up question, if I could, just for you, regarding the banking system and, contemplate the full access. Would a final agreement contemplate a full access of Iran to the banking system and the U.S. payment system?
Again, anything involving the U.S. is not really part of the sanctions relief. Iran would be able to access, again, the European, the Asian financial system, and the secondary sanctions on those banks that are doing business with Iranian banks, they would not be penalized by doing business with the U.S. financial system. But direct Iran-U.S. financial transactions would still, that is not contemplated as part of the relief package.
Thank you. Question for Ambassador Mousavian from Sputnik International News. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said he would recommend Iran joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization if the nuclear deal is successful. What would the implications of this be, and how would Iran and the SCO partners benefit?
Iran is already participating on all Shanghai's high-level meetings, and if Iran is member, there would create more opportunities for Asian cooperation between Iran and China, Iran, Central Asia, Iran, Caucasus, and even Iran and India. This would have more impact on Iran economic relation with Asia.
Just as a general for the panel, we've got about 17 minutes to go. It's a broad one. It's what will the U.S. Congress do, which is just sort of going to be filling a lot of air in terms of time. But if anybody would like to comment on that over the next 3 months.
Hi, Mom.
C-SPAN's here.
Well, the U.S. Congress will do what the U.S. Congress will do, and that is debate this issue and take partisan viewpoints and try to work this through in whatever manner they will. There's an election year coming up. There's always an election year coming up. And it's going to be hardball. And that's pretty much the way it's going to work out. And the House and the Senate are now run by the Republicans, which, for those of you who don't know, that means that they run who gets invited to the committees and actually run the questions in the committee assignments. So things are going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a very rough road.
Yep, I agree with him. But to my understanding, is not only because of the next U.S. election and the domestic rivalries between Democrats and Republicans. It has a lot to do with the influence of Bibi Netanyahu, AIPAC, and more, I believe, a big misunderstanding, not only in the U.S. Congress, between a lot of U.S. politicians. You hear from many U.S. congressmen that we should keep the sanctions, pressure Iran. Iran only came to nuclear negotiation deal or framework because of sanctions, pressures. Still, they keep the same narrative. In all debates, you read the same narrative. But a very simple fact. Before sanctions, Iran had a few hundred centrifuges. After sanctions, Iran increased to 22,000 centrifuges. Before sanctions, Iran was enriching below 5%. After sanctions, Iran increased to 20%. Before sanctions, Iran had just a few hundred kilograms of stockpile. After sanctions, 10,000 kilograms. Before sanctions, Iran was working with 1 generation of centrifuges, now 8 generations of centrifuges. This was really the impact of sanctions. As President Obama said, suddenly the P5+1, they opened their eyes and they recognized Iran has just 3 months to break out. The only thing really made the sanction, the deal or the framework possible was, first, the U.S. agreed to Iran to have enrichment for its domestic practical needs. That's why Iran accepted to every transparency measures, and Iran was ready to give every confidence-building measures that Iran would never divert its nuclear program toward weaponization, because practically they had the same red line. Ayatollah Khamenei's red line was nuclear bomb. He has a fatwa beyond the NPT, and Obama said our red line is nuclear bomb. These narratives still has not been corrected in the U.S. Congress. There is a big misunderstanding, and they are repeating the same mistakes. Today, more concerns about issues beyond nuclear. You heard our panelists that they discussed about other threats, Hezbollah, Hamas, Israel, regional influence of Iran, and so and so and so. The reason Netanyahu and even some Arab allies and the hawks in Washington, they are pushing the administration to continue coercion strategy is to contain Iranian influence and power. This is the reality. But as long as they really do not recognize the fact, what is the fact? I believe for 35 years, the US, Europe, the world powers, they did everything they could on coercion strategies against Iran. Unilateral sanctions, multilateral sanctions, UN sanctions, a war against Iran. 1 million Iranians, they were either killed or injured. Even using chemical weapons against Iranian. The material technology was provided by the US, Europe, and Arab allies. They all supported the use of weapons of mass destruction against Iranians. 100,000 Iranians, they were killed or injured. No other country in the last 35 years has been under so much of pressure and sanction orchestrated by the US. However, after 35 years, everybody today is crying and complaining why Iran is so stable, why Iran is so powerful, why Iran has so influence. Iran is everywhere, from Beirut to Baghdad to Yemen, Iran is everywhere. This is a clear evidence and fact that 35 years of sanctions and pressures and the most powerful coercion policies against Iran not only has failed, but has strengthened Iran's stability and power in the region. And look at the US allies in the region. Where is Mubarak? They got all weapons, all monies, all supports. And you can see the collapse of US allies in the region, and the others we cannot say, but everyone understands they are very vulnerable. Therefore, and one would say, look, if you are right, then if we lift the sanctions, Iran would be more aggressive. Here is another misperception, misunderstanding about Iranian culture between our regional Arab allies and even the West and even in Washington. I have been 30 years within the Iranian administration. I'm Iranian, and there is a culture. They need to understand Iranian culture. More pressure, more sanctions would make Iran more aggressive. Therefore, as long as the Congress follows the coercion strategy, Iran, like last 35 years, would be more aggressive. And you would cry more, you would be feared more about the role of Iran. If there is more opening to Iran, more cooperation. Iranians, they would make a deal like you on all other disputed issues, like the flexibilities they did on the nuclear. Therefore, as long as this narrative continues in U.S. Congress, I am optimistic even about the future of Iran-U.S. relations. I'm pessimistic, sorry.
Dr. Sullivan, you want to, or Imad?
Well, one country we haven't mentioned here is China. And they are very much involved in this situation, including developing two of the largest oil fields in Iran under sanctions. I don't think the issue is an application of too tough sanctions. It's an issue of not applying the sanctions that we already have in certain circumstances. The Chinese import 60% of Iran's oil exports. They built a rail system. They built roads. They're very much involved in Iran right now. The Russians are very much involved. That's another country we have mentioned once or twice in here. It's not just the U.S., and we have lost leverage. Some people in this city seem to think that we can do something and the world jumps. This is a different world. China is a powerful country. Russia is not as powerful. Its economy is degraded, and its leaders, and, that's something else. But the Chinese are a powerful country that wants more influence in the Middle East, and they're moving into every single country. It's one of the few countries that helps Saudi Arabia and Iran at the same time, invest in Saudi Arabia and Iran at the same time. They support the Palestinians and the Israelis at the same time. They're playing a double game, and they're playing it brilliantly. And our leverage in the region is not what it was even 5 years ago. So to think that we can say sanction and close the door and everyone jumps, that's not the way it is anymore. This is a different region. It's a different Iran. It's a different China. China, when this whole thing started, was a poor country back in 1979, the Iranian Revolution. China was a poor country, had no real clout in the region, and it didn't start importing oil until from Oman in 1983. This is a totally different world. We have to get up to speed on this one.
Yeah, but back to the Congress issue. The unfortunate fact is I believe that the only hope that might come from anything related to Congress is that the White House would have some sort of a ability to break the veto-proof kind of thing. Unfortunately, the situation is such that congressmen are not necessarily listening to reasoned argument.
I share Ambassador Mousavian's pessimism with regard to Congress, but come at it from a slightly different perspective, but I end up with the same point, and that is the pressure of lobby groups, neoconservatives, and those who are interested in advancing the Israeli narrative or Israeli objectives or Israeli interest. And Iran has become quite convenient as a distraction from Israel's actions, Israel's policies, Israel's positions, Israel's fait accompli. And it will continue to serve this tactical role to deflect attention away from the Eastern Mediterranean, specifically Israel and its building of settlements, by focusing on Iran as the whipping boy, the bad boy, the scapegoat, the fear-mongering there. And this is because it has been a successful tactic by Israel and its friends. In 1982, the U.S. was on a roll and a run, having Camp David under its belt and gotten the Israelis to withdraw from the Sinai. And the next items on the agenda were to be Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza. And the Israeli pushback was over our dead bodies. This will not be your agenda. And we thought that this was hubris run amok. but it wasn't. I sat in on meetings in January of '82 where State Department briefer said that between April 15th and June 15th, Israel will invade Lebanon. And we said, why would they do that? Because there's a ceasefire. That's already 7 months, been negotiated with the PLO, Lebanon's intelligence, Mossad, and CIA. By then it'll be 11 months. Why would they do that? And the answer was because they want to change the agenda completely. And indeed they did by invading Lebanon. And they remained there directly or indirectly for the next 19 years, during which time, with the attention deflected, the settlements doubled, trebled, quadrupled, quintupled, and those settlements all remain. So this is quite tempting. Even with the United States invasion of Iraq on March 19th, 2003, in the period since then, Israel has built the so-called separation barrier, or the security wall. And this is cut into what was to be the territory for an independent state of Palestine, on 22% remaining. So territorial expansion has occurred in the shadow of deflecting American attention. And we have done nothing to prevent those events that I just described. That is, put a just, enduring, comprehensive peace even further from the reach of those who've tried in the last year with Secretary of State Kerry, before him Mitchell, before him Colin Powell, before them Tony Zinni, etc. We've been ineffectual, so I share the pessimism of the ambassador, but I arrive at it differently. Iran will continue to be an object of scorn and isolation if people in Congress and those who lobby them are successful.
Thank you. I think we've got probably less than 3 or 4 minutes left, so what I would like to do is just one final question and pose it to the panel. We just go right down the row and see what we have to say about it. What would be the regional implications and repercussions for a failure to arrive at an acceptable March 30 deadline? What's the next step if there is no agreement on the technical details over the next 90 days?
Go ahead, Chief.
We'll start with Dr. Sullivan and move this way. So,
Probably a delay, because I don't think it's going to be a reachable goal. It's going to be an extremely complicated situation, and to just give up and throw your hands up on July 1, that would probably bring a great deal of political resentment and anger within Iran, within the Iranian leadership, and the implications of that could be significant for whatever is happening between the United States and Iran on other issues. If it breaks down entirely, then we're back to step one. And to get these folks back into the table, even if it's that wonderful 10-star hotel in Lausanne, it's going to be very difficult. The proxies for Iran and others may also react in a kinetic way if this happens, making life far more complicated in the region. The game has started, and I don't mean a fun game. I mean a very complicated and dangerous game. And it may not be a retrievable one if this thing breaks down. But the agreement, if there is to be an agreement, has to be a proper one and very long-lasting, and has to be a step to going to deal with the other issues that are involved with this. Otherwise, we'll have an agreement on something narrow and nothing else.
I agree with Paul about that maybe the resort would be to postpone the negotiations on the technical agreements, but technical details. But at the same time, if we resort to if we postpone those, then it's likely that elements within the Iranian regime will try to stir things up regionally so that it's more of a bargaining chip in those extended negotiations.
I think given the reaction in Iran to the tentative deal, I think it is going to be extremely difficult for Iran not to go forward and have the final deal. I think the repercussions in Iran would be tremendous if there were a collapse at the end of this. I think President Rouhani probably could not finish. Minister Zarif would certainly not be able to continue. I think you would see a major, major upheaval if this doesn't go to completion at this point.
Yeah, I agree that the technical details are so difficult that I would fully expect when June 30th comes some announcement about extending the talks and continuing. And I think that would suit a number of the Gulf Arab states because they would like to see a tighter agreement negotiated, and they don't want sanctions lifted yet until the agreement is better, and because they have recently, I think, realized that they need to lead in dealing with geopolitical threats rather than wait for the United States to lead them. And but not only that, but they're also seeing that the United States is responding to their lead, and the United States is gradually getting more involved, helping in Yemen, helping more in Syria than before. So I think it would suit a number of those states for the negotiations to continue until a better deal is agreed upon.
I believe already the negotiations have reached to no return point, and they have already decided to strike the deal, and they would reach. The U.S. also cannot leave the negotiation table. The world powers, they cannot leave the negotiation table because of three reasons. One, from the beginning, they agreed criteria would be NPT. They have signed. There is nothing left or disputed within NPT. Already everything within NPT is agreed, even in details. Second, Iran is the only country with measures on verification, no breakout, non-diversion toward weaponization, for accepting far beyond NPT. And third is the realities in the region. This really dictates to them to finish the job by July 1st. If it fails, I believe neither we would have upheaval in Tehran nor in Washington. Neither we would have regime change in Tehran nor in Washington. Iranians, they would be able to continue another decades like they have been able to resist and to stay stable, powerful in last 3-4 decades. But the implication, even if we do not agree with the world powers, why Iran and the regional powers like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, they cannot sit together and to agree on the same measures within NPT and beyond NPT for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region? Why? This is already achievement for the regional countries, regional powers to sit together to agree for a regional mechanism. I think Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Iraq, really they are the main powers. And finally, regardless of the nuclear issue, the problems in the region definitely is far beyond the Iranian nuclear issue. And as long as we don't have regional cooperation between regional powers, Iran, Saudi Arabia, GCC, Turkey, Egypt, we are not going to get to anywhere, even if the deal is done on the nuclear.
Well, it's 12 o'clock. It's time to move on, close the proceedings here. I want to, on behalf of the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations, I wanted to thank our distinguished panelists for coming today, share on such short notice to share their insights, knowledge, wisdom, and projections for the future. Let's hope the next 3 months are eventful. And as closing, I wanted to just point out that the President's legacy is on the line on this. So it's with serious discussion and debate that we'll be probably moving forward in the next 3 to 4 months. He says if we can take the nuclear issue off the table and bring regional stability to the Middle East, these are noble objectives which I think in the days ahead will, as a result of our insights here, give us a better understanding of whether or not these are actually achievable ends and noble goals that can be pursued with success. Thank you again for coming. You've been a great audience and wonderful questions.
That Iranian nuclear framework announced last Thursday in Switzerland. Secretary of State Kerry is meeting this morning with the President and Vice President. And just a note, if you missed any of this discussion, we'll air it later on our program schedule. You can also watch it online at cspan.org. It is 1 week until Tax Day. The Washington Post leading their coverage today with a look at long